My name is James Keller. I'm 33 years old and a commissioned officer in the United States Army. I was born into this world wearing camo before I could even walk. Both my parents served. My father retired as a 2-star general, the kind who could shut down a room just by walking in. My mother was a combat medic who could field dress a wound with one hand and field a press interview with the other. Growing up, our house wasn't a home as much as it was a base. Morning routines were timed. Dinner conversations came with after-action reports. Eye contact meant respect. Posture was non-negotiable. There's a certain pride that comes from tradition, a sense of legacy. I wore that pride like a second skin through most of my life. West Point, Ranger School, deployed twice, decorated, promoted, saluted, all of it. On paper, I was the dream child of a military family. But behind the paper, behind the medals and titles, I was a man who started to question if pride should always come dressed in uniform. The first time I met Emma, she was mopping the marble hallway near the officers' lounge at the training academy. It was the end of a long day, and I was too tired to pretend I didn't see her. She looked up, said evening, and kept mopping. That's all. No shrinking, no flirty glances, no attempt to impress, just presence. Stillness. A kind of quiet confidence I hadn't seen in years. I found reasons to take that route again. She never made it easy to talk to her. Always focused, always moving. But the more I watched her, the more I started to notice the little things. How she wiped the same corner 3 times like she was polishing it for someone important. How she tucked away her loose hair before moving to another hall. How she always finished her shift with a small bow to the flag in the atrium. That wasn't habit. That was reverence. It took weeks before we had an actual conversation. Months before I asked her to coffee. And almost a year before I realized I was in love with a woman who'd never worn a uniform but held herself with more discipline and grace than most officers I knew. That realization didn't scare me, but telling my parents did. When I told them about Emma, I thought I was prepared for the reaction. I thought wrong. My mother went quiet, then said maybe I was just lonely from deployment. My father asked if this was a phase. My sister, who works in military intelligence, sent me a list of dating apps for professionals. They didn't ask about her, not what she loved, not how she thought, just what she did. A janitor at a military school, that was all they needed to know. They started dropping phrases like optics and image. My dad reminded me that leadership wasn't just how you performed in combat, but how you carried yourself in society. My mom suggested I wait until I was promoted again before making life-altering decisions. My sister joked at dinner that Emma probably had access to the officers' lockers and would know everyone's secrets. No one laughed, including me. It's strange. I've spent my whole life making decisions in pressure-filled environments. But somehow, this one loving someone my family didn't think was worthy felt heavier than combat. Maybe because the enemy wore my last name. Maybe because they believed they were protecting me. Maybe because I wanted their approval more than I was willing to admit. But I couldn't pretend. Not when Emma looked at me like I was a person, not a rank. Not when she made me coffee at 5 a.m. and said she was proud of me before every training drill. Not when her hands were always rough from work but still found time to straighten my tie like it mattered. That wasn't convenience. That was care. So, I decided I would tell them we were getting married. And I would face the consequences of choosing someone who cleaned the hallways for a living but never compromised her dignity while doing it. I just didn't know how far those consequences would reach. Or how silent a family could be when they felt embarrassed. Or how powerful that silence could become when it shows up on your wedding day. We arrived at my parents' house a few minutes early. Emma had brought a bottle of wine she picked out herself. She wore a soft blue dress and tied her hair back the way she did when she was nervous. My mother greeted us with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She took the wine, glanced at the label, and set it down without comment. My sister showed up 10 minutes late and gave Emma a side hug like she was meeting someone who might be contagious. Dinner was already plated. No small talk, no warm-up. Just the clink of silverware and my mother asking Emma how long she'd been working in facilities. Emma replied calmly, explaining her role at the academy, how she managed sanitation protocols and equipment logistics. My mom nodded, then said it must be nice to have so much job security in government maintenance. My sister added that she once read a study about how exposure to cleaning chemicals can dull the senses. Then she offered Emma a second helping of mashed potatoes and asked if she liked starch. Emma smiled and said yes. She always smiled when it was uncomfortable. The questions kept coming. Subtle, cold, precise. Did she find the staff respectful? Did she feel fulfilled? Was the pay consistent enough for her to save? My mother's voice was sweet, but each word had an edge. My sister scrolled her phone at the table, then suddenly perked up and announced that her fiancé had just closed a property deal in DC. She turned to Emma and asked if she'd ever considered night school, just to expand options. And Emma folded her napkin slowly, keeping her hands steady. She said she liked her work because it allowed her to move, to think quietly, and to contribute to the space where people learn to lead. My father, who'd been silent until then, said leadership came from example. Then he asked me how many soldiers under my command had degrees. I told him most of them. He looked at Emma and said nothing. I wanted to flip the table. Instead, I poured more wine. I held Emma's hand under the table and felt the tension in her fingers. She didn't squeeze back. Not out of coldness, but because she was trying so hard to hold herself together. That night, I saw how much strength it took to stay polite when everything in the room was trying to shrink you. When dinner ended, my mother offered Emma a pre-packed container of leftovers. She said, in a voice soft enough to sound kind but sharp enough to cut, that everyone should take something home. My sister said maybe next time we could all dine out, somewhere where Emma would feel more comfortable. We walked to the car in silence. Emma didn't say a word until I started the engine. Then she turned to me and asked if my family had always been that careful. I said yes. And I told her that she'd handled it better than I did. But what I didn't tell her that night was how ashamed I felt. Not of her, of them, of myself. For not stepping in sooner, for letting it happen. For every second I sat at that table and let her feel like she didn't belong. 2 weeks before the wedding, my father asked to meet me for lunch. It wasn't a request. It was a summons sent through a calendar invite with the subject line, family alignment. We met at the officers' club. He was already seated when I walked in, back straight, hands folded. The way he used to look before debriefings. I knew what this was before he even opened his mouth. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask about Emma. He started with legacy. He reminded me how long our name had been tied to the service, how his father and his grandfather had worn the uniform before him, how reputation wasn't something you built overnight, but it could be ruined in seconds. He paused, then he said marrying a cleaning staff worker would make that second last a lifetime. I didn't speak. He went on. He said optics matter. He said leaders have to make hard decisions. He said personal choices have public consequences. Then he looked at me, and for a second his voice softened, like it used to when I scraped my knees as a kid. He said he wasn't angry, just disappointed. That maybe this was me acting out after deployments. That maybe I was too close to see the damage I was walking into. Then the softness vanished. He said if I went through with the wedding, he and my mother wouldn't attend. Not because they didn't love me, but because they couldn't endorse what he called a lapse in judgment. He used the word compromise, as if love had become a security risk. When I didn't respond, he pushed his plate forward, stood up and said, "You know what the right thing is." That was the last sentence he spoke to me in person. A few days later, I got an email from my mother. It came with no subject line, just 4 lines of text. She said, "With sadness, we decline your wedding invitation. We have always held our children to high standards. You are making a choice. So are we." I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand, but because I needed to be sure they meant it. The absence of warmth hurt more than if she'd screamed. No emotion at all, just policy. like I was being processed through some internal family tribunal. I didn't tell Emma. Not yet. I just stared at the email and felt something break. But underneath that crack, something else started to shift. Something slow and solid. I'd spent my whole life trying to make them proud. To walk their path, speak their language, earn their stripes. But this wasn't honor. This was control dressed as love. That night, I poured myself a drink and stood on the porch for hours. Not because I was afraid of losing them. I'd already lost pieces of them over the years. But because I finally knew I wasn't willing to lose myself, not for tradition, not for pride, not even for family. The chapel was quiet, not the reverent kind of quiet, but the kind that reminds you who isn't there. We had picked a small ceremony on purpose, but even the empty seats felt louder than the vows. Emma looked beautiful. She wore a simple dress with no lace or glitter, just clean lines and soft fabric that moved when she did. Her hair was up, her smile steady, but her eyes kept flicking to the door, as if someone might walk in late and fix everything. No one did. The aisle stayed empty. My side of the pews had 3 people, 2 friends from my unit and my old squad leader. Emma's side had more, mostly coworkers from the academy and her aunt, who flew in from Idaho with cookies wrapped in foil. There were no photographers, no floral arch, just a line of folding chairs and a man with a guitar who played off-key but sang with heart. We said our vows. Her hands trembled when she held mine, not from nerves, but from the weight of all that silence behind us. I kept my voice steady, even though my chest felt hollow. When the officiant said the words, "I do," I said it like it was the most certain thing I'd ever spoken. After the ceremony, we stepped outside into the cold November air. Someone popped a bottle of cheap champagne. Emma laughed for the first time that day. It wasn't loud, but it was real. I kissed her forehead and told her she looked stronger than anyone I knew. That's when my friend handed me the envelope. No return address, just my name. Inside was a gift certificate from a dealership and a note. We thought it more fitting for Claire to have the Mustang. She'll make better use of it. Love, Mom and Dad. I read it twice before folding it in half. The Mustang had been promised to me since I was 16. It was my grandfather's. We restored it together, one summer between deployments. My father used to say it would be my wedding gift, a symbol of legacy. And now it was a reward for silence. A final insult wrapped as inheritance. I showed Emma the note. She didn't flinch. She just nodded and said, "So, now we know." Then she turned back to greet her aunt and ask if the cookies had almonds this time. Later that night, I sat on the edge of our motel bed while Emma changed into sweatpants. I looked at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She wasn't broken, just tired, but still standing. I'd spent weeks wondering how it would feel to get married without my family present. Turns out, it felt like stepping into a room with no ceiling and no echoes. Nothing to bounce your voice off of, nothing to fall back on, but also nothing to prove. It was just me and Emma. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The day after our wedding, Emma and I were called to the Academy's auditorium for what we were told was a routine facilities walkthrough. She almost didn't go. Said her shift ended early and she didn't want to wear the uniform polo again so soon. But I convinced her. Said maybe it'd be quick. Said maybe showing up mattered. When we arrived, the room wasn't empty. On stage stood General Raymond Connors, a man I hadn't seen since a security briefing 5 years ago in Kabul. Behind him, a few senior officers and administrative staff filled the first row, all turned to watch us enter. Emma froze beside me. Her hand tightened around mine. The general stepped forward. He looked at me, then at her. And then, in front of everyone, he asked if she still remembered the dust storms in Kandahar. Emma nodded. Her face changed. Not in fear, in recognition. He smiled and said he owed her his life. Then he told the room that Emma Keller, formerly Major Emma Grayson, was once a decorated intelligence officer in the United States Air Force. He said she served with distinction in multiple overseas operations, including one classified mission that saved his convoy from an ambush. He said the reason she wasn't in uniform now was not because she lacked discipline, but because after her honorable discharge, she gave up her commission to return home and care for her dying mother. The room was silent, not the kind of silence that feels awkward, the kind that feels sacred. He said Emma chose a quiet job at the academy, not because she had no other options, but because she wanted to stay close to the place where she once taught cadets the value of humility. He said she was the kind of leader who didn't need medals to prove her worth. Then he looked at me and said, "You married someone the rest of us were lucky to serve beside." Emma hadn't spoken a word, but when the general finished, she turned to me, her back straight, her chin high. Then she took one step back, raised her right hand, and delivered the sharpest salute I'd seen in years. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't for show. It was quiet, precise, complete. I stared at her, stunned. I had known the woman she was with me, but I hadn't known the depth of who she used to be. And yet, somehow, it all made sense. The way she watched people, the way she listened more than she spoke, the way she moved through the world like she didn't need validation from anyone. In that moment, I didn't feel small or ashamed. I felt proud, I felt honored, and I felt like the luckiest man in the room. No one clapped, no one needed to. The truth had already filled every corner of that hall. And from that day forward, no one at the academy ever looked at her the same way again. The video of Emma's salute made its way online before we even got home. Someone from the academy staff had recorded it, posted it with a quiet caption. No hashtags, just 6 words. She never needed the uniform back. By morning, the clip had reached every major military page. Comment sections flooded with veterans who recognized her name. Articles were written. Editorials praised her dignity, calling it one of the most honest moments of leadership they'd seen in years. Even the Department of Defense shared it, using her image in a campaign about unseen service. Within a week, Emma received a formal invitation to consult on training reform at the Pentagon. She read the letter twice, set it on the table, and went right back to packing our things for the move. I didn't expect to hear from my parents, but I did. First a voicemail from my sister, her voice softer than I remembered. Then an email from my mother, asking if we could speak in person. My father didn't write. He sent a forwarded article with no message, just his name below it. I thought about responding. For a while, I really did. I stared at the screen and waited for a feeling that might push me to call. But it never came. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. So I wrote them a letter. It wasn't long. I said I appreciated their concern. I said I had chosen a life built not on appearances but on respect. I said I would always value the discipline they taught me. But I no longer measured love by silence or loyalty by tradition. I ended the letter by wishing them peace. He never heard back. There's a strange calm that comes after a storm you thought might destroy you. It doesn't come with fireworks or closure. It comes with quiet mornings, coffee with someone who truly sees you, a small home filled with fewer expectations and more sunlight. I didn't get the parents I hoped for on my wedding day, but I got the partner I didn't know I needed, and somehow, that turned out to be enough. Maybe more than enough. Maybe exactly what freedom was always supposed to feel like. We live in a small cabin now, tucked just outside the perimeter of the base. The windows face east, so the morning light always finds our kitchen first. Emma wakes up before me most days. She brews the coffee strong and black, just how I like it. Then she taps the rim of my mug twice before setting it down. A habit from her service days, she once told me. Quiet acknowledgement. Respect without noise. Some mornings she salutes me as a joke, sharp and crisp, then laughs as she pulls her sweater tight. But sometimes she does it seriously. Those moments hit different. It's not about rank. It's about memory, about love forged in things not everyone sees. We keep our life simple. I still report for duty. She spends her time reading, writing, advising part-time. Our home smells like cedar and old books. There's always a half-finished project in the yard and a full jar of coffee beans on the counter, It's nothing grand, but it feels right. I think back often to what we went through, the silence, the rejection, the weight of legacy pressing down like armor I didn't ask to wear, and how close I came to trading love for approval. But in the end, I chose her. And every morning she chooses me again, in the coffee, in the stillness, in the way she never once made me feel less for being broken. If there's anything I've learned from all this, it's that freedom isn't granted, it's claimed. It's not about flags or uniforms or family names. It's about living in a way that doesn't ask for permission to be whole, loving someone without measuring whether the world thinks they're enough. People still ask about the story, about the wedding, about the salute. Some think it was a political moment. Some call it inspirational. But to me, it was just the moment I finally saw the truth. That dignity doesn't need defense. And that love real, grounded love is the most radical kind of freedom there is. So I tell them, not with anger, not with pride, just peace. She makes my coffee every morning, and I remember that I never had to earn her love. I just had to be brave enough to stand beside it.